What if stepping away from crime didn't save you, but signed your death warrant? Gary Hutch believed he was out. He paid €200,000 for peace, thinking it would buy him freedom, but instead, it bought him a bullet. Days later, he was hunted down and gunned down beside a pool in Spain. His death was not seen as just a hit. It was more like a betrayal, and it kicked off one of the most violent and public gangland feuds Ireland has ever seen. Stick around, because the truth behind this story is deeper than you think. Gary was born into one of Dublin's most feared and well-known crime families, the Hutch family. His uncle Gerard Hutch, more commonly known as the Monk, was already a legend in Irish criminal circles by the 1990s. Gerard, or Jerry, earned the name the Monk because of how he operated, being remarkably disciplined, quiet, and tried his best to keep a low public profile, which somewhat mimics the life of real monks. Known for masterminding high-profile armed robberies, Gary Hutch was also smart and calculated, the kind of man who stayed off the radar while quietly trying to build a fortune. Under the shadow of such family influence, it was perhaps no surprise that Gary himself fell into a life of crime from a young age. By his 20s, he had gained a reputation as a hardened criminal. He was involved in armed robberies and eventually earned a conviction that put him behind bars in Ireland. After serving his prison sentence, he was released in 2007. Then, he relocated to Spain, specifically the Costa del Sol. This was not for vacation or retirement. It was a step deeper into the criminal underworld. And this time, the names he was associating with were even bigger and darker. In Spain, Gary Hutch joined forces with the Kinahan Cartel, a powerful and rapidly growing criminal and drug trafficking organization led by Christy Kinahan and his son, Daniel Kinahan. The Kinahan Cartel wasn't your typical local crew. They were running a multi-million euro drug empire by importing cocaine and heroin into Ireland, the UK, and beyond. Their base of operations? The very same Spanish coast Gary had moved to. For a while, everything seemed to be working. Gary Hutch was a trusted figure in the cartel. He had family ties in Dublin and blood connections to the Hutch gang, but he was now also working under the Kinahan umbrella. In some ways, he was the bridge between the two worlds. But in criminal circles, trust never lasts forever. Tensions escalated dramatically in August 2014. Something happened that changed everything. In Marbella, at a villa linked to Daniel Kinahan, the well-known British boxing coach Jamie Moore was shot and seriously injured. It was a hit gone wrong. Jamie Moore survived, but it didn't take long for rumors to spread. Was the intended target Daniel Kinahan? And was the man behind it Gary Hutch? Whether or not Gary ordered that hit remains up for debate, but what matters is this: the Kinahans believed he did, and that belief sealed his fate. The accusations didn't stop there. On top of the alleged murder plot, the Kinahan cartel leaders believed Gary was leaking information to authorities. In the Kinahan world, that's not just suspicion, that's a death sentence. Gary Hutch knew his days might be numbered. By early 2015, he feared for his life and started spending more time back in Dublin by lying low. But Dublin held its own dangers, and he couldn't stay hidden forever. Desperate to save Gary's life and prevent an all-out gang war, the Hutch family reached out to the Kinahans to broker peace. A deal was made. The Hutchs agreed to pay the Kinahan cartel €200,000, which was meant to be a payoff in exchange for Gary's life, on the basis that he would step away from the cartel, go quiet, and he would be left alone. After the money was paid, Gary was told it was safe for him to return to Spain and retire from gangland activity. Tragically, it was all a calculated deception. The stage was set for betrayal. Gary Hutch walked back into a deadly trap, unaware that this promise was never real. The money was taken, the promise was made, and in life, and also the criminal underworld, a promise is a comfort to a fool. The fragile sense of peace was about to be shattered in the most violent way possible. On the morning of September 24th, 2015, Gary Hutch was at the Angel de Miraflores apartments complex in Mijas, near Marbella. Then, around 11:30, a gunman wearing a balaclava arrived and began chasing him around the swimming pool. The gunman opened fire and shot Gary Hutch multiple times, hitting him at least 15 times before Gary fell mortally wounded. Witnesses later said Gary tried to run. He tried to plead, but the hitman didn't hesitate. The killer jumped into a getaway car and disappeared. Local authorities and medics arrived at the scene of the shooting by the pool, but it was too late. 34-year-old Gary Hutch died from his injuries almost immediately. It was a cold, calculated kill, planned down to the last detail. But not a lot of people were shocked. Many saw it coming because it was so bold and clearly carried out by a professional hitman. It was exactly the kind of killing you'd expect in Ireland's gang wars. Spanish police immediately started investigating, and the news soon reached Ireland. It didn't take long for detectives and reporters to see the obvious connection. This was a cartel assassination. Gary Hutch was already well known as a criminal who had fallen out with the powerful Kinahan Cartel. Now it seemed the Kinahans had finally decided to take him out. But what nobody could predict, though, was what came next. At Gary Hutch's funeral, his mother pleaded for peace, no retaliation, and no more bloodshed. But in the world her son came from, that plea didn't stand a chance. In the criminal underworld, blood calls for blood. Despite the Hutch family's public calls for calm, Gary Hutch's murder lit the fuse on what became one of Ireland's deadliest gangland feud. In late 2015, while the family was still mourning Gary's brother Derek Delboy Hutch, who was in prison at the time, was stabbed and slashed in two separate vicious attacks behind bars. Once in October and then in December. It was believed to be a message from the Kinahan Cartel that nowhere, not even prison, was safe for a member of the Hutch family. Around the same time, associates linked to the Kinahan Cartel were targeted in drive-by shootings. The tit-for-tat had begun. By the end of 2015, it was apparent that a full-blown gang war was underway, even if it hadn't yet exploded into the public's eye. On February 5th, 2016, a boxing weigh-in was being held at the Regency Hotel located on Swords Road in Whitehall, just north of Dublin city centre. Dozens of people filled the room, the normal attendees like journalists, families, and boxing fans. But that day, the fight wasn't going to be in the ring. A team of armed men stormed the hotel. Some were dressed as police officers, others wore wigs. All of them carried AK-47s. It was a massacre in the making. The gunmen opened fire without thinking of the innocent people in attendance. David Byrne, a high-ranking Kinahan Cartel associate, was shot in the attack and died on the spot. Several others were injured. Chaos unfolded as people fled the building, screaming and bleeding. It was one of the most audacious gangland attacks ever carried out in Ireland. And it wasn't just about revenge. It was a message. Gary Hutch's killing had been answered. 3 days later, the Kinahan gang responded back. Eddie Hutch, senior Gary's uncle and Jerry Hutch's brother, was murdered in his home. He wasn't a player in the feud. He drove a taxi, but his last name made him a target. The murder of Eddie Hutch Sr. had made one thing brutally clear. Even those with minor or distant ties to the Hutch family were now considered targets. In March 2016, Noel King-Size Duggan, a longtime friend of Jerry the Monk Hutch, was shot dead while sitting in his car outside his home in Rue Toth. Just weeks later, Michael Barr was gunned down inside the Sunset House pub in Dublin. Though not a major gangland figure, Barr was rumoured to have had links to the Regency Hotel attack. In May, Gareth Hutch, a nephew of Jerry, was murdered outside his apartment in broad daylight. The violence didn't stay contained to Ireland. In August, Trevor O'Neill, a completely innocent city worker from Dublin, was shot while on holiday with his family in Mallorca. The killers mistook him for a Hutch associate. He died in front of his children. In December, Noel Kerwin, a family friend of the Hutchs, who had recently attended Eddie Hutch's funeral, was executed in his car outside his home. The killings were fast, cold, and relentless. Most of the victims were connected to the Hutch side. Some had no criminal records, but the Kinahans didn't care. For them, association was enough. The feud dominated headlines. Front pages showed images from the Regency Hotel shooting, CCTV stills of masked men with assault rifles, funeral after funeral, guards at every door. People in Dublin's inner city lived in fear. Innocent people were caught in the crossfire. The Irish government had to act. A dedicated police task force was created. Armed patrols increased. Surveillance ramped up. But even with all that, the killings continued. By late 2017, at least 18 people were dead. Years after Gary's murder, the Hutch-Kinahan feud came full circle when Jerry the Monk Hutch was arrested and extradited to Ireland. He was charged with organising the Regency Hotel shooting, the same attack that left David Byrne dead. The trial became one of the most closely followed in Irish history. A former associate, who turned state witness, claimed Jerry had admitted to it. But after months of testimony recordings and cross-examinations, Hutch was acquitted in 2023. The evidence wasn't strong enough, the court had doubts, and the monk walked free. Still, the trial pulled back the curtain on the entire underworld. So what happened to the Kinahans? Today, the cartel is under global pressure. The US government has imposed sanctions. A $5 million USD reward each has been offered for information leading to Daniel, Christy, and Christopher Jr. Kinahan's arrest. International law enforcement is watching. The walls are closing in, but for many in Dublin, it's too little, too late. The families of the dead still mourn. The communities still carry the trauma. And it all began with a single betrayal. Was Gary Hutch's death inevitable? Some say yes. He played a dangerous game and crossed the wrong people. What's clear is that Gary Hutch's murder smashed the little bit of peace the Hutch family tried to patch together, and the consequences, as we know, were very deadly. Only one man was ever convicted for the murder of Gary Hutch.
A jury in Spain has found 35-year-old James Quinn guilty of involvement in the murder of Gary Hutch.
James Quinn, a Dublin native, was found guilty in a Spanish court in 2018, not as the shooter, but as a necessary participant. Prosecutors alleged he was the getaway driver, and DNA evidence placed him inside the stolen BMW X3 used in the escape. A handgun was later discovered in the bedside drawer of his Costa del Sol apartment. He was sentenced to 22 years, 20 for the murder and 2 more for illegal firearm possession. His appeals were rejected, and he remains behind bars in Spain. So what do you think? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching.